Good afternoon, everyone. So glad to be here with you. I'm Mike Williams. Of course, this is Kellan Peterson, pastor of youth and young adults here at Table Rock Fellowship. And we want to wish you all a very happy and healthy Thanksgiving. We hope everyone got stuffed with plenty of good food and good times with family and friends. And especially in this, our Table Rock Pastors Conversation, I have a reason to give you to be thankful. Thankful that I am not in front of the camera more often. So a little change up of pace here, yeah. But it was such a great weekend and a great time to spend. Kellan, you had a great lesson that I really am excited to unpack, as Bill Muir would say.
Yeah.
So again, welcome, and thank you so much for taking the time to put things together.
Absolutely.
For this weekend. So you titled this The Urgency of the Gospel, and specifically the last two verses of James. Can we talk a little bit about the book of James? Just kind of a brief overview. Tell me a little bit about who James was, what his role is, and then I know a lot of people have called the book of James the wisdom literature of the New Testament because it reads a lot like Proverbs.
Yeah.
And you link that. So share with me just a little bit of a background there.
Yeah, so James was the half-brother, not step-brother, I think. I think I'm getting that verbiage right. So he was the half-brother, believed to be the half-brother of Jesus. And so he would have spent a lot of time at Jesus' side, familiarizing himself with his ministry. And then, he was one of the early church fathers, and he wrote this letter to the Christian community, trying to address, I think, what he perceived as a lot of things they were kind of messing up. And so the beginning, I think actually one of the last times I was preaching, I actually preached from the beginning of the book of James, which is "Count it all joy, my brothers, when you endure trials of many kinds." So his book is great because it covers what it is to wrestle with joy when things are hard, what it is to wrestle with doubt. He talks a lot, a fantastic lesson for people of any ages, but especially for youth, as he talks about the tongue being like a small spark that sets a forest on fire, and that's convicting. So it's a very short, simple book, but it's got so much depth, so much richness, and so much nuance. It's one of the books, I think I have preached through the book of James in my time in ministry, I think 3 separate times. And every single time I do, something else stands out to me. Something else kind of pops out, and I learn more each and every time. So it's one of my favorites. It's good.
Right. So in the it was James chapter 5, last chapter, last 2 verses. And to your point, kind of an abrupt ending to a letter. But he addresses it specifically, and this is where you started. He addresses specifically to brothers and sisters, and talking about this notion that as the family of God, as the body of Christ, as the church, that we're supposed to be in a community.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of people, like I was saying earlier, I think a lot of people have this idea that the Christian faith is basically a spiritual self-help thing. Like, I come, I get what I need out of it. Maybe I'll fold up some chairs or help out in the parking a little bit, but there's not the sense that we should be intentionally fostering community. Because that's the thing, community does not happen by accident. You have to be so intentional. It means you have to overlook people and forgive them when they say or do something off-putting or even borderline offensive. It means that you have to intentionally continue to reach out, and you have to remember the things that are going on in their life. Few things are more heartbreaking than when someone will bare their soul, and then the next time you see them, oh, how are things? They're I just told you, not great. So all that is about just being intentional with community. I think there are probably a lot of people who come on Sundays, and I think for a long time I held this view. I thought that community just happened by fiat. I just showed up, I sat next to somebody, I was in community, and that's not at all the case. Community it's intentional, and it's hard. It's work, but it's good.
I think you've pointed to it a couple of times. It also runs contrary to our modern American, especially culture. We're not really, for the most part, in the American identity, these tight familial units,
right?
Especially if you consider some other cultures, whether it be the Latin American cultures, or I come from an Italian background where everybody is always in everyone's life forever.
Yeah, whether or not you want them to be.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But as Americans, we tend to be, there's this, like you said, this whole notion of independence, this whole notion of my home, my castle, my, kind of stuff. And that's a real challenge, I think. And so what are the practical, let's just get right into it. What is the practical way that we can, because like you say, be intentional at forming community?
Yeah. So it's a great point. I think that for the average person, when they look to create community, their first priority is they look for a community that benefits them personally. So I think we've especially seen this, the explosion of the internet. You now have micro communities that exist. They're pockets of people from all over the globe that form online communities based off of their love of like weird things, right?
Okay.
So like Japanese anime or whatever, just not things that are bad, but things that might be niche. They may not be mainstream, but they form very tight-knit communities, and again, that's all based off of what are my interests, how can I find other people that identify with my interests and that will ultimately benefit me. The Christian view of community is upside down. Like everything in the Christian life is upside down. So if you're looking to intentionally seek community, you're not necessarily looking for something that benefits you personally. You're looking for an area where you might be able to serve one another and love one another. So when I think about building community, I try not to. I'm not always successful, but I try not to think, great, let me find somebody with all my interests,
right,
that we're going to agree about politics and faith and religion and how to raise your family and whether or not pineapple belongs on pizza. It doesn't. But like we look for those things, and then that's our basis for forming community. But Christ says, no, go find the lost, go find the hurting, go find people that might need you more than you need them, and building a community based off of that, because that's a Christ selfless, focused community. But it takes some humility, and it takes intentionality, and it takes us being willing to risk letting someone into the privacy of our lives that might be a mess, or that might be able to see what a mess we are. And that's hard.
Well, and you said something there about finding people of similar, we want to find people that agree with us.
Yeah.
And especially, there is a kind of a divisive nature in the American culture right now. And these little micro communities can often also, we seem to seek out these echo chambers, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Places where we'll hear our own thoughts, our own things echoing back at us and other people, and we nod our heads and we go rah rah, and all of that. You talked about worldview in this concept of straying, and finding a community of a biblical worldview. So I want to break that down, because that's not a term a lot of people use when they say, well, what is your worldview? You don't, that's not common conversation,
that's
right?
True.
But everyone has one, whether they know that's what they have or not. Yeah. You have a worldview. So talk kind of on a general sense of what is a worldview, and then let's really get finite and say, what is a biblical worldview, and where do we as individuals, what are some questions we can ask ourselves maybe to help us figure out what our worldview is? Yeah, it's a great question. I think so. Everyone has a worldview, and when I say worldview, what I mean is we all have this conception about how the universe and the world around us should operate. I think that a lot of people have the worldview that people are intrinsically good. That's a worldview belief a lot of people have. People are intrinsically good. The badness, the evil, the misfortune is because we are products of our society, but not of our own nature. Christian worldview stands opposed to that. People have a worldview about what is expected of them. They think, I do good things, I spit good things out into the universe owes me good things in return. That's just a fundamental worldview. Some people have the opposite worldview. They think that nature is chaos and capricious and unkind, and so they are very quick to be victims in their own stories, because they think nothing is fair. I've been trying my whole life. I've never gotten what's due. The American worldview, you can even go a little more specific, because the American worldview, and I think this is fading. The old version of the American worldview used to be, you work hard, you'll get the nice things that you need, you'll be able to provide and have 2.5 kids, right? That was picket fence. Yeah, exactly. That was sort of the boomer worldview. And as that sort of faded, you've got my generation, the generation afterwards, who are jaded. Right. And they come in and think, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how hard I work. It's all about what class system I was born into. I was born into a poor neighborhood, and so I might get out of it, but chances are no. So we all have a conception about things. And that conception includes things like gender equality and social justice, all things that are good inherently, but these things motivate
the way that we talk and interact with the world around us. And so everyone's got one. The Christian worldview is very, again, it just stands contrary to a lot of these things, because the Christian worldview says it's not about you. You're not a good person. You were actually born with a sin nature, and you need saving. Jesus is the only one that can do that. Shy of him, no amount of morality or altruism is going to make a difference. It also says that the chief way you are called to interact with other people is to love them like you love yourself, to love them more than you love yourself. That worldview stands contrary to so many things. I mean, everything else says it's about what you can get out of it. It's about making sure you get yours. The Ayn Rand Atlas Shrugged worldview of like, it's all about the rich, the elite. It's all about selfish like intent. And Christ flies into opposition of all of that. He says it's not. It's about each other, and it's about me.
Right. So if we take this, I guess part of this Christian worldview is accepting the fact that we, in a sense, are our brother's keeper.
Yeah.
We are the very first part of that. Brothers and sisters, look out for one another. I mean, there's tons of those one another scriptures, right?
Yeah.
Encourage one another daily, spur one another on to love and good deeds. All of these are in there, right? So this starts getting a little, this is where, like you explained, the tension can hit.
Yeah.
When the words in this verse, turning them back, this sort of rebuking, is that like equivalent to rebuking of sin? And if it is, how do we avoid becoming righteousness police?
Yeah. Yeah, I think a big part is, like, again, what's your intent in the relationship? So the term righteous police is a great one, because I think that's the mentality sometimes we're quick to adopt. But that's actually more about us than it is about the other people. Like, if you're taking that stance, like the righteousness police, they need to know what they're doing is wrong. You're more concerned that your opinion gets across than you are that that person actually changes or does anything. And so when you engage with somebody, that's what I was saying, that what you need to keep in the forefront of your mind is, what do I want this relationship to look like when I'm done here? I think that it just changes things. I had a conversation with one of my friends who was struggling in his marriage, and his wife was making some really poor decisions that was tearing them apart. And he said, I don't know what to do, because I'm afraid if I point out these things, I'm afraid it's going to damage our relationship. I don't know how to say these things and still make sure that she knows I love her. And I looked at him and I said, what happens if you don't? What happens if you don't say any of these things? Your relationship is going to get torn apart. It's not love to keep silent. It's not love to allow someone to continue on in their bad behaviors. So it's all about the motivation. It's all about, are you trying to do what is genuinely best for them? Not what you think is best for them, or not so that way you can say, I told you so, but are you trying to do that and bring them back to a healthy relationship with Christ? And again, I think if you do that, you're going to be a lot more humble in the process, because you should always go into those conversations expecting to be proven wrong in at least one of your ideas. Like, if you come at somebody and you're like, hey, you're messing up, and then they're like, oh, actually no, and then they share their perspective, their opinion, you need to be humble enough to say, oh yeah, I was wrong about that, sorry about that. But if you're like, no, if you're always like committed to this idea of like, I'm going to be right, you're going to be wrong, you can get that across, it's easy, but it's not healthy.
Right. Well, I'm particularly convicted because I mean, I'll admit I'm a know-it-all by nature. I mean, I love trivia. I was always good in school because I could memorize things like you. And I always blamed my Italian heritage. I love a good debate.
Yeah.
You know, that's just how we communicate culturally is loud, and we can be discussing the weather and it sounds like we're having a knockdown drag out. But all these parts are part of my nature. And then as I became a Christian, as an adult, I discovered that, especially as a young Christian, I was also a zealot in nature. Yeah. So it's really difficult, or it was easy to get inclined towards seeing the speck in my brother's eye. Yeah. You know, and going, man, you know, God needs me to you know, and I've got it. And that's where again I sit back and I go, I understand the concept. Yes, I'm supposed to be involved in people's lives, and I should help, but I don't want to be that person where the only thing I see is the speck in their eye. Yeah. Where the only thing I see is whatever debatable right or wrong that I've come up with, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I think finding that balance, and I guess to your point, is maybe looking and saying, what do I want at the end of this relationship? So often when I'm thinking about the occasions where I felt compelled to talk to someone, I didn't really have a relationship with them in the first place.
Right.
To even know if there's a backstory or to even know. And then second, I can't say that my goal at the end was for us to be closer together and for them to know that I genuinely love them. So that's very convicting to me personally. But at the same time, Satan can, I think, use that to turn us into a bunch of cowards.
Yeah. Oh, totally. Yeah.
Right. So how do we not? What is that line? How do we not just go, oh well, someone else will talk to him about that. I'm sure they know him better.
Yeah. I think the easy answer is listen more than you talk when you're with them. So I think I'm probably going to misattribute this quote. I think it was Will Rogers who said, it's hard to hate a man when you know his story. So I always think about the way that Jesus approached the gospel. I think we're very quick to do what Jesus never did, which is that we're very quick to throw the gospel at people without seeing them as people. And Jesus, every time he interacts with them, he looks at Zacchaeus and he says, I'm going to come to your house. He broke bread with tax collectors and prostitutes, and it made people furious with him. But I have to believe that after Christ spent all that time, and I don't think he spent most of it talking, I think that Jesus spent time listening to people. He's telling me about your kids. Tell me about your life. What was your favorite childhood memory? Where could you go if you could go anywhere in the world? Something like that. And then he just listened without waiting to interject, without waiting to make his own point. And I think if you build a relationship with somebody that's based on this vulnerability, and if somebody has confided things in you, and then they know that you love them and care for them, and then you're like, great, can I talk to you a little bit about my faith, even if you don't believe it? I have never had somebody say no to that. If I put in the legwork of getting to know them, genuinely showing them that I care and respect them as a person, and then if I'm like, hey, can I just share something that's really important to me? Every single time, like, yeah, that's great, because they know that I love them.
So that actually applies both for a body of believers and in an evangelism, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Because I was more thinking in the terms of it within the body, thinking, oh well, some other brother or some other, they know them better, they'll talk to them or whatever. But again, to your point, having those relationships, and if something is, would you say this is safe? If something is bothering me or I feel something is spurring me on to talk to someone, that my first step really is to go and let's look at our relationship.
Yeah.
No, we don't have to go bowling and then axe throwing and then, have Christmas dinner together and all of that kind of stuff. But I think there should be, a warning that we're being, righteous police is if all we're doing is finding, that one there and that flaw there and that flaw there, and not going in at all and just, going to try to correct.
I might step on some toes by saying this. I recognize that. I don't know that the method of evangelizing where you're like handing out tracts, I don't know that that's nearly as effective. In fact, I personally have yet to meet somebody who I was like, how did you come to know Jesus? Like, oh, somebody handed me a piece of paper at a festival. That might happen, so I'm not discounting that. But almost every time when I talk to somebody who is a genuine believer and I say, what drove you to faith? There's usually a person behind it. And that person loved them, cared about them, and then said, can I introduce you to Jesus?
Right. Almost
every single time. So I think that if you're going to go share the gospel, make sure you know the person you're sharing the gospel to.
Right.
Because if they're just if you don't know their problems, you don't know their struggles, how are you going to effectively communicate to them? I mean, each person needs something different out of the gospel, and when you get to know their stories, and you get to know who they are as a person, you can curate the gospel presentation for that individual.
Okay, so let's talk about the Great Commission.
Yeah.
Right? We talked about the things that hold us back from just realizing, because if we are going to be, it's repeated over and over again from Jesus through the teachings of Paul, through every believer in Jesus is a missionary.
Yeah.
We all have a mission field. Not all of us are street preachers. Not all of us are pulpit teachers.
Yeah.
Not all of us, but we all have a mission field, right? We're all missionaries. So these things that hold us back, I think the biggest one that I've experienced in my life has been this sort of self-deprecation.
Yeah.
Oh, well, it's almost the Moses thing. I'm not good with my words.
Yeah.
I'm not equipped. I've only been a Christian so long, or I don't connect thoughts well enough, or I don't have enough verses memorized that I can. So how can people overcome their fears? What is a way that we can, what's a practical ways that we can overcome our fears when it comes to evangelism? Or even just confront the fact, this is the other one I hear a lot. Well, I'm not an extrovert.
Yeah. Well, I'm not either, which is kind of funny because I do what I do and I do love it. I think we're real quick to discount our abilities based off of a handful of factors. I think part of it too, understand what the objective should be. Because if you go and your goal is to share the gospel and then have that person say the prayer by the end of it, you're probably going to be disappointed a lot. That happens so rarely, in my opinion. So when we think of evangelizing, I think we think of success and failure. It's a success if they say the prayer, I'm evangelizing, but it's a failure if they don't. And when we draw that line and we say, I'm bound to fail, yeah, you probably are. You probably are going to fail at that most of the time, if that's how you define
Do you
evangelism.
think it was sort of the revivalist movement that kind of created that sort of mentality, that the means to an end kind of thing? Like you have to get the prayers, you have to get the pledge cards, you have to get the follow up, you have to get like you go into an evangelistic encounter with a result in mind, and anything else is a failure. Do you think that's a product of sort of even as late as the 1800s? These kind of revivalist kind of mentalities.
I actually heard Billy Graham preach one time. I went to UCLA football stadium, and Billy Graham filled a football stadium, gave the altar call, and it was a flood of people coming down.
Right.
Amazing, super impactful. But they've done studies now. They find that more people, so those who are unchurched, are more likely to join a church once they've been in the home of somebody who's a church member first. So that's why that's why we put such a big emphasis on like life groups, because if you were to come up to a coworker and say, hey, would you come to church? Like, oh, no. But if you say, hey, we're going to be doing a Bible study. It's open-ended questions. You can come and feel free to ask or just to listen. We'll provide food. Would you be interested in that? People are like, yeah, I'd check that out. The level of comfort, especially if you built a good relationship with them. So yeah, I definitely think there's been that sort of mentality of like, it's about the altar call. It's about the numbers tallied at the end. How many people raised their hands when they asked? And that's the success or failure. But the reality is, evangelism it's always happening. We're never not evangelizing to some extent.
Right. For better or for worse sometimes, right?
Exactly. Whether or not you're good at it or you're doing harm, we're always evangelizing. And so when you use that term, we might need to break it down even further. You're an evangelist when you're loving people the way that God calls you to. That's a success. You're an evangelist if you can get them to listen to a 30-second elevator pitch about Jesus. You're an evangelist. You're an evangelist if you can, if somebody's in need and you bring them a turkey dinner and say, this is from my church. That's an evangelist. I mean, we're all called to be evangelists. We shouldn't be setting the bar in terms of like success and failure. It should be this thing that we're always doing all the time.
So how would you recommend? Because I think that fear of being properly equipped.
Yeah.
So what would you recommend? What if you wanted to give someone even the most basic tools? I mean, honestly, the thing that comes to my mind is throw out your expectation of what equipped means.
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so. Okay. So pragmatically, I always carry the Gospel of John. That's a great. So I've got like a small little booklet, and so if people kind of will ask some questions, I'm like, hey, here's a great thing. Like we can keep those as resources. So I'll give them to students, and I'm like, hey, if you're talking to your friends, offer them that. They can read it, they can not read it. But there's something just so innocuous about having a small little thing. Handing someone a chunky Bible, like, but handing them something small. And the Gospel of John is so good because John knew Jesus intimately.
Right.
So that's part of it. The second thing is, when it comes to being like prepared or equipped, the only real qualification is that you've spent time giving it up to God. I mean, that's it. God is the one who prepares and equips us. So if you're saying, I'm not equipped to do that, it's like, do you not know how to pray? Because if you can pray, you're equipped. That's it. So if you just say, God, I'm going to go to lunch. I'm going to sit next to my coworker. God, give me the right words. you've become equipped. In that 5 seconds, you become equipped. If you walk into that thinking, nah, I'll just wing it. Like, don't worry, God, I got this one. You've done enough work, big guy. This one's on me. You're not equipped.
I'm so convicted. So when I get quiet, that's when you know. Okay, so you referenced 2 Timothy 4,
Mm-hmm.
and you used the term Saturday that you didn't use Sunday, but I think it is huge. You talked about capitalist religion.
Yeah.
And I loved it, frankly, because I think it does describe a lot of our natural tendency and I've been the guy to say, well, I'm just not getting much out of church right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Talk about that concept, capitalist religion.
Yeah, it's not about community at that point. It's about getting what we want. I think that we've let the idea of capitalism bleed into a lot of areas of our life. And I mean, I'm not talking about the evils or the goods of capitalism, but I'm simply saying that as Americans, we have this idea that the product serves to fit the user. And so if the product is church and the user is us, if the product doesn't work, we find a different product that works. And so if I attend a church and like, man, I just don't like the pastor's style. I don't like the fact that they don't do old hymns, or I hate the fact that they have an electric guitar in worship. Whatever it is, we don't like the aesthetic, we don't like the thing. Chances are you could find a place down the road. Oh, so I'm gonna step on some toes. I don't care. We saw this happen in a huge way over the past year when it came to the controversy of masks. Right. Oh my goodness. People decided where they're going to worship God, not based off the brother or the sister that they were called to worship with, but based off of the current opinion of the church or the state or whatever. People are like, I'm not going to even go to that church if you guys won't accommodate my personal thing. And that drove me crazy because I thought, well, then what were you going for in the first place?
Right.
I think that shone a light on a lot of people's reasons for going. It wasn't actually about community. It was about the fact that it suited their needs. And as soon as it stopped, gone. I'll go to the church down the street. And that's on both sides. That's people Correct. Who are both frustrated with Mass or without Mass. So that's not a commentary on anything.
Correct.
But I'm saying overall in the nation, that was a deciding factor for too many people. I saw that happen, friends and family and people, and I thought, you're missing it. It never has been about that. It's always been about the community. It's always been about where's God called you to serve. And if God's called you to serve there, then if there are some things that don't suit your needs, be that change. Change it so it does.
Right, and that really ties into where you finished.
Yeah.
You finished with this concept of serving. When you're a part of a community, find some place to serve. Now, I'm on staff here, so I get to see a lot of where the needs are.
Yeah.
And let me tell you, if you're not aware, there are huge needs. The coolest and best ministry.
Yep, me and Jordan.
Right
I'll
there.
give Jordan. He gets like,
with the
not
youth
second place,
kids.
we're like right there.
He's right there, okay. But just even, and there are things for every type of person, every type of talent. Mm-hmm. So you had a great quote at the end, and I was going to ask you if you could say it again, and let's talk about that.
Yeah. So I was saying that the more mature of a believer you are, the less the church exists to suit your needs. It should be a place where you're serving. If I've talked to a member of the church who says, I've been coming to here for 5 years, I'll say, great, where are you serving? Oh, I'm not serving. What do you mean you're not serving? Were you coming to the same place for 5 years and you're not serving? You've been coming to the same place for 6 months and you know that this is your church home? You're a mature Christian and you're not serving? It's always one of those simple truisms that 90% of the work get done by 10% of the people.
Right.
And so you've got the small backbone, the heart and soul of everything that happens done by a very small group of people. I actually think Table Rock kind of bucks that trend a little bit. I actually think that we do have more people serving than the average church. But to your point, the needs are still great.
Right.
And there are still a lot of people who are attending and they're just getting enough out of it just to suit them. So I was talking to one of my friends. One of my friends moved from Seattle and is now living in California. And I was talking with her, and she was saying that she's struggling to find a church. And I was asking, what have been some of the things you've been looking for? She talked about the preaching, and I said, well, you're an amazingly gifted servant. She's great with kids. I had her up here for a little while. She's fantastic with kids. I said, what you need to do, find a church that works just even okay. It may not check all the boxes. Find a place that works okay, and then volunteer your time helping out in youth ministry, because as a youth pastor, If somebody who is talented and qualified came up and said, "Where can I serve?" Oh my gosh, tears.
Right.
And so that's why I think there are probably too many people still who show up on Sunday, who show up on Saturday, and who are maybe even in a life group. But that's the extent of their involvement. And to that point, I would say there's still community that needs to be built. We need you.
Right. Right. And you're never too old. You're never too young. There are so many unique places. And I guess that's really where, all of this is great. But really what we're talking about is building this whole community. And if we build this community and we watch out for one another to keep each other on a narrow path out of love, not out of a police mentality or out of self-righteousness.
Yeah.
But if we work and build that community and then we start giving to that community, serving in the church and then serving outward, that's how lives are transformed.
Yeah.
That's how neighborhoods are transformed.
Yeah.
That's how, and that's really a great place for us to wrap it up.
Yeah.
And I just want to encourage everyone, if you're watching this and if even the smallest little thing in your heart says, man, there might be something I could do, reach out. You can call the church office. Diana is wonderful on the phone. You can talk to me. I'm always around. Talk to any of the pastors. Talk to anyone. And we can find a place where you feel that you're contributing in a way that you really enjoy, because the need is so great. So awesome stuff, Kellan. I really, really appreciate it. Would you go ahead and just pray us out?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
God, I just thank you for this opportunity that we have. I pray during this Christmas season, as we're just about to jump into December, I pray there are people who are listening to this who, when they think about sharing the gospel, a face and a name comes to mind. Somebody they've been praying for, somebody that is close to them. I pray that that person would be bold this month. Got a whole month to do it, but I pray that they might seek and be intentional about finding those opportunities. God, ultimately, we're a community based around our love of you. And we're so grateful to have somebody who knows us, flaws and all, and still calls us his beloved children. And ultimately, that's why we can overlook these things in one another, because we have been forgiven of so much. I pray that this does wonders for our community this year. I pray that we would be bold and courageous, that we would love you, and that our eyes would always be focused on you above all else. And just thank you for this time. Amen.
Amen. Well, have a great rest of your day, folks, and we look forward to seeing you next week.
Yeah.